The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, it's time to file your taxes. And although many of us will be waiting longer than expected for refunds, some individuals may have bigger issues such as tax evasion and fraud. Tonight we have a guest on set to scare you straight into tax season. Next up, if you are starting a business, a contract between partners is advised. But what does that entail, and should you do this without counsel? It's Business Contracts 101, and we have you covered. And finally, estate planning is not something we usually discuss with our loved ones, but we should. Our guest tonight will tell you why. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Okay, hello, and welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook at Today's Verdicts and check us out at BronxNet.tv. The consequences of not paying one's taxes has civil and possible criminal penalties enforced by the Internal Revenue Service. Well, joining us today to tell us more about tax evasion and tax fraud is attorney Alvin Brown. Hi, Alvin. Thanks for being here.
Okay, thanks, and pleasure to be here. And it's always good to help people. I am a tax expert. My specialty is helping people with their current IRS problems.
I have to tell you, tax season is very scary for a lot of people. Nobody likes to necessarily file, and they certainly don't want to get hit.
You're making an assumption that's not always true.
Tell me.
And the assumption is that people are filing taxes. A lot of people are not filing taxes. And so I want to start by addressing people who are not filing taxes because they don't have the money. They're afraid to file. They don't know what, they don't have the data. So they're scared to file, and they don't file.
Does it catch up to them at some point?
It can, but that's if they don't file. Well, first of all, if they don't file, they get penalties. There's a non-filing penalty of 25%, and there's a 20% negligence penalty, underpayment penalty of 20%. Why pay the IRS an extra 45% plus interest? And then if they should have filed 5 years ago, that's going to be double. So. And filing the return will start the statute of limitations. There's no statute of limitations if you don't file your tax returns.
So the IRS can go after you. Just so the viewers understand this, that means that if you don't file your taxes, and it could be 5, 10, or 15 years later, the IRS can look after you for those monies?
Absolutely. Okay. No, there's no statute. So anyhow, people, and they can be picked up for fraud because non-filing would be something that would be considered for tax fraud.
That's what I want to talk about. So maybe let's take a step back here. How would you define tax fraud or tax evasion? Really, how is it defined for the viewers so they understand it?
It's willful, intentional violation of the tax law.
Okay,
it's willful.
Willful meaning
it's subjective.
You didn't mean to do this, or you did purposely do this. Tell me what you mean by willful.
Well, willful is subjective. It's intentional. Okay. So how do you prove something willful? You do it through extrinsic evidence. What do you call it?
What would the IRS look at to suggest that maybe you were willfully hiding monies or something?
Well, they want to know if you filed returns. If you filed the return, did you make any false statements? Did you conceal any assets? Are you cooperating with them? So these are the factors they take into account to show willfulness. The courts call it badges of fraud. There's maybe 10, 12 elements that they will look at, and if it tilts in the direction of fraud, then it's fraud. But
now, how do you get involved in these types of cases?
Well,
when does somebody come to you? At what point? Do they get a letter from the IRS? Do they get a call?
I get a lot of people who call me because they haven't filed. So it's the first thing I do is to go to a return, prepare, file. If you don't have the data, then I encourage them to file estimating the data, but it's a filed return. And that'll start the statute of limitations, and then it eliminates fraud. When you willfully comply and file, you don't get involved with the
You
tax
avoid the
fraud
fraud.
statute.
Right.
So always do that. And then I'll just give you a little story.
Sure.
I have a client local here in Howard Beach, and he didn't file. He never filed the tax return. So he came to me when the Department of Justice was knocking on his door, and so I had a Department of Justice case. So I talked to him, and he never filed. So that would seem to be, and they were going to indict him. So
What kind of criminal penalties could you face for this type of thing?
you go to jail. You go to jail for 5-6 years,
All right.
and could be more. You know, based on the sentencing
This
guidance.
is serious stuff we're talking about.
Anyhow, he told me one fact, and this is interesting. He told me that he felt guilty. He didn't file because he didn't have the money. He was giving money to he had children, a blind son, a sister. Nobody was making. He was the only one in the family making money. So he's giving out his money. He didn't have any money left over to pay taxes. Family first, right? So he told me one story. He felt guilty about not filing, and he set aside about $40,000-$50,000 to pay the IRS. And then his foreman stole the money.
Oh, boy.
And then, but I had the name of the. So anyhow, I told the prosecutor this guy didn't commit fraud because he willfully wanted to comply with the tax law, and they checked it out, and they did not indict him. They found the guy who stole the money. He admitted to it.
Okay.
And they, so what?
So there was
what
no
that's-
willful, so he was
it was
trying
not,
to
he
pay.
was trying. That was it.
What tips would you give to somebody who's watching, who, got a letter from the IRS and they're saying that, that you were willfully hiding monies, or that something that came up on an asset search that apparently shows that you have assets that you didn't particularly list, or income you didn't list? What would you tell them to do?
Well, there are defenses. You didn't know the law. You're familiar. You thought you were divorced, and your ex-wife threw out all the paper. I didn't have the data. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't file, including the fact that they don't have the money to file. But everybody must file.
Do you think with the government slowdown that occurred that the IRS is going to be affected in terms of its ability to...
Well, the IRS is understaffed as it is. They're under budgeted. The Congress doesn't love the IRS. They should, because the IRS collects the money. That goes to Treasury. Why would you not fully fund the IRS? It's crazy. It's nuts. So the fact the shutdown, they weren't collecting money. The statute of limitations knocked off. I have a client now. In March, she's going to get about 90,000 knocked off from the statute of limitations.
Alvin,
They got 10 years to collect.
Very important, Alvin. Where do we find you? If somebody has a problem, where do they grab you?
Well, I'm a tax expert, and I'm an expert in handling IRS matters. So I can help anyone with any kind of a tax issue, a real tax issue. And if they don't know anything about taxes, I'll give them guides. They can call me, and I'll give them a free consult.
Great, and we have some information on the screen for them also as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
call me anytime, email me, and I'll take your call.
perfect. Al, thanks for being here.
Okay.
All right, hang on here. Don't go anywhere. But we have to take a quick break, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. Nearly all business dealings involve some form of a contract, but how do you find the right language to secure your assets and protect yourself from possible creditors? We're joining us today to tell us more is attorney Cal Greenberg. Cal, thanks for being here. Cal, let's start from picking the right person to go into business with before you even start this whole process of a contract, right? What would you, any advice that way?
Well, you have to find somebody you get along with to start with. Otherwise, whatever legal arrangements you work out may fail, because you have to start off on the right foot.
Okay, now let's say you start, you meet somebody, you want to go into business, you want to form some kind of partnership. Do you start a PC first, an LLC? Do you do a business contract first? What's the order that you would usually recommend?
Well, I would incorporate the business, either a subchapter S or LLC. The LLC requires advertising, a little more complicated. There's some advantages to it for real estate, on real estate, but basically I would prefer if you're just starting out, the subchapter S makes the most sense.
Okay, so let's say you found the right person, you're ready to go into business, you're going to be selling whatever it is you're selling or whatever it is you're doing in terms of services. It's time to start with the contract. Oral, written, which one?
Well, an oral agreement is not a good idea.
Why is that?
The statute of frauds, generally the oral agreement can't be enforced. Secondly, everybody has a different idea what they agreed to.
All right, so let's get it in writing.
You have to get it in writing.
All right, so now you're going to put it in writing. What should be in that contract? What should you make sure is there to protect the client?
Well, if it's a business partnership or a business arrangement, you should determine who's doing what. Who's going to be the inside man, who's going to be the outside man, what the percentages are, who owns what. In some cases, you have an employment contract to make sure that the person still can be employed as the business goes on.
Well, let me ask you a question. In terms of, the minutes of the corporation and, in terms of what types of liabilities that you may have or incur if it turns out that the business goes bust, are these in the contract itself, or is this an addendum to the contract, or what usually happens?
Well, if the business goes bust, if you're incorporated, it doesn't affect there's no personal liability. If you go bankruptcy, only the business assets are affected, and that's what you want to make sure happens.
Are your personal assets ever going to be attached if it turns out that the business doesn't
Only
go?
if they pierce the corporate veil, which is that means...
What does that mean? Because the viewers don't understand that it's a very important topic, piercing the corporate veil. What does that mean?
It means that you've been mixing your corporate assets with your personal assets, and then the creditor will look into that and say you're piercing the corporate veil if the judge agrees, and they'll get your personal assets.
All right, so
under those circumstances.
Let's say, unfortunately, things are not going well between the partners, or if there's more than one among the partners, and now it's time for litigation. Do you arbitrate this? Do you go to see to a judge? Is it a trial by jury? How does it usually work?
Well, one of the things you should have in your agreement is an arbitration clause, because litigation is expensive, time-consuming, it takes forever. You're better off settling it. You're better off getting it done quickly. I would have an arbitration clause in the agreement. If you don't have it, then you could still arbitrate if both parties agree. Otherwise, it goes to court, you have discovery, you have a long-term problem that the case could go on for years.
In terms of your own practice and what you've seen, what kind of issues seems to arise with the business contracts? What do you see more often than not as the problems?
Well, the problem is who's doing what, really, because what happens is two people get involved in an agreement, they start, they create a corporation, and then one person starts infringing on what the other person's obligations are, that they create resentment.
Well, give me an example, really.
Well, in other words, let's say you're a startup tech company.
All right.
And you have one person who says they're going to do the financing, and another person is going to run the day-to-day activities. But the person that's doing the financing ends up getting involved in the day-to-day activities, and he doesn't have that much knowledge about it, and it created a whole, in one case, it created a whole problem, and it ended up badly.
And those type of situations, do they end up going right to arbitration, or
Well,
what usually happens? I mean,
in
do you
some, it falls apart. In that case, the person was summarily dismissed. That's why you need an employment contract.
Okay. Tips. Somebody's watching right now. They have a brother-in-law or somebody that they're ready to go into business with. The brother-in-law says, I'm not too big onto contracts. We should just do a shake hand deal. I'll get 50%, you get 50%. You don't recommend this, right?
I would say a brother-in-law is a warning factor right from the start.
Okay, and what would you say in terms of just getting the ball rolling? Like, how would you start it?
I would say this, to go to your point, there was a famous person years ago, John Connolly. When Kennedy was assassinated, he also got a bullet, but he recovered. After that, he was in the real estate business in Texas, big mega deals, but he said he only did business on a handshake. He didn't incorporate any of his businesses. So in the late 80s, he declared bankruptcy, and everybody was surprised that a man of his stature would do that. I saw him on the Today Show around that time. He said, that's the way we did business in Texas.
By a handshake.
Don't do it that way.
Don't do it that way. All right, and finally, most importantly, where can we find you?
calgreenberg.com.
Okay, and
On my website, my email address is cal.greenberg. The dot is important. cal.greenberg@gmail.com, and my phone number is 718-324-7200.
and you promise you'll come back and give us some more tips when we need you,
I
right?
will.
All right,
Thank
well,
you very much.
That's right. All right, but we have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encourage you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. Living well after you're done working is everyone's dream, but for a good retirement, you need to do some serious estate planning. Am I correct?
That's correct, David.
That's why we have you here.
Thank you.
All right, Juliet Gavriel. Juliet, it's not easy to discuss these things with your family. Am I correct? I mean,
Absolutely. People procrastinate endlessly because it's so traumatic to think about.
And I would think, when you get to that certain age, you don't want to let your kids maybe take all that hard-earned money, or they think that you've worked that and you're going to take their big funds from them. But this is a conversation you really should have with,
Yes.
with your family. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And people put it off.
All right. So how do you do it? How do you even start and approach somebody from your family, your mom or your dad or someone, and say, look, we got to talk about this. You have some assets here, and we don't want to, pay the IRS one day if, God forbid, you're not around. Or maybe we want to protect Junior from himself or something. How do you even start and get them to sit at the table like we're sitting and start having this conversation? How do you do it?
Well, I think before you even speak with your family, it's very important to get educated yourself on this topic. And the best way is to read up on it. Go to a seminar, estate planning seminars. A lot of attorneys do give nice seminars, an educational refresher on the different types of choices.
So even if you're not an attorney and you're just a lay person and you want to learn a little bit about estate planning, find one. And they're usually around the city, these seminars?
Yes. Well, I myself, for example, I do host it maybe like once a month at 5 different locations, and we are able to explain the different ways of estate planning, the different components of estate planning, and what would be the repercussions of not doing any estate planning.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning, all right? Let's say, my parents had a certain amount of assets and they're on board, they want to start, moving things around a little bit, protect their grandchildren, grandchild, whatever. What would you tell them? How do you start? Where do you go?
So
Do you want like a list of their assets? What do you want to do?
That's exactly it, David. So the first thing is when I see clients, I tell them always never to, I don't give them any homework ahead of time. But it's good to know what kind of assets they have, right? Maybe they can make a list of their real estate assets, their investment accounts, IRA accounts, also what's in the checking savings accounts, so that they have a ballpark figure.
When they make these lists, should they also be giving you like the bank account numbers, the actual addresses for the real estate, all the specific things for you?
That may come on the second or third meeting, but in the beginning, we just want to know exactly what we're dealing with, right? So where do we go from there? What I always tell my clients, right, if you don't have much assets, what do we all need, right? A person who's an adult, and definitely well after you're 30, you need to think about having a last will and testament. You need to think about a power of attorney. Healthcare documents. The legal landscape has changed tremendously in the last 30, 40 years.
So when we're talking about estate planning, it's not just your money.
It's not just your money.
It's it's also your health. It's do not resuscitate orders. It's healthcare proxies. It's who's going to manage you.
Yes, in the event that you can't speak up for yourself, right? And when I was growing up, at least, I was always schooled that, well, all you need is your last will and testament, right? But there have been privacy laws that have been enacted, so your family cannot call on your behalf without a power of attorney.
That's correct. I mean, let me tell you something. If you end up, God forbid, in a hospital with a medical condition, that will is not going to do very much for you.
Nothing at all.
Right?
Nothing at all.
It's always, you show the doctor, well, here's the will, and I'm the executor.
Right.
Yeah, well, mom and dad's still alive, so that's not going to help us.
Absolutely not. And I've seen countless of families run into trouble with that. And David, if you don't have these kinds of documents, you know what happens? People have to go and petition the court for a guardianship proceeding. That's really a nightmare. And people don't want to deal with lawyers and courts and judges when their family member is dying or it has become incapacitated.
So let's talk a little bit more about maybe what you would recommend to certain people with respect to their assets at this point, right?
Assets, so very important topic, right? If we have assets, I do recommend clients thinking about protection from the nursing home in the event that they end up in the nursing home.
And what do you mean specifically by that? How do you protect yourself from financial hardship when it comes to the nursing home?
Okay, so right now the minimum cost of a nursing home in the city of New York is approximately $14,000 a month. I mean, that can break anyone financially on a long-term basis.
So 10 months, $140,000, if that was your savings, you're done. Right?
That's it. And then
your loved ones don't get that because it goes to the nursing home. So how do you
That's right.
protect those monies?
So I think that the expression, if you don't plan, you plan to fail, aptly, figures into this situation, because you need to make sure that you have 5 years of planning before everything goes into an effect. How do we do that? It's an irrevocable trust. People transfer their assets into this type of a trust, and after 5 years, they can get qualified to have the government pay for them in the event of a nursing home. And the wonderful thing about these laws that the federal government has enacted and New York State, what happens is,
I know we're talking about Medicaid planning, right?
right, Medicaid planning with assets.
Well, does it, I know you're saying it's 5 years, because it always changes, 3, 4, 5.
So
What's
great
the-
question.
What's
so
the number?
it's actually 5 years. And when these laws were enacted in 1993, it was only 3 years. In
right.
2006, it was bumped up to 5 years. So you always have to start looking ahead into the future.
So when you think about it, you got to be 5 years ahead.
That's right.
So anyone who's watching is, look, Mom, Dad, you're 80, okay?
Right.
I'm hoping you're going to make it to 85. I'm sure you will. But if not, you got to start moving these assets out to the grandkids or to somebody else, because if you end up in the nursing home, all these wonderful assets that you have
May disappear.
will disappear.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
think about it. I mean, $14,000 a month, it goes very fast.
That is correct. That is correct. And the other issue is a lot of people are afraid of, giving up complete control of their assets, and that's what a trust does. It does. It actually protects the parent from giving up complete control, but they are able to protect the assets simultaneously. They're able to have the tax exemptions on their properties continue.
When you do the estate planning and you meet with a client, and
Yes, sir.
do you do it all together? In other words, do you incorporate the will with the trust, with the healthcare proxy? Did you try and get it all together in one document, or do you end up with somebody who has like 5 different documents, and because people start to lose these things as they get older?
Absolutely, David. So that's a great question. So what I do is I make sure that my office is a one-stop shop, so to speak, right? Because we do need a last will and testament, powers of attorney, healthcare documents, the trust, and most importantly, what I don't see a lot of fellow attorneys do is they don't fund the trust. So that's a legal term of art. Funding means someone has retitled your assets into the trust, and that's what I do. I make sure that the assets are actually transferred into the
Get
trust.
money into that hub.
So if you have a house, there has to be a deed transfer into the trust. If you have a condo somewhere else, it has to be transferred. And if you have life insurance policies, investment accounts,
Transfer to. Most importantly, Juliet,
yes, sir.
where do we find you?
You can find me at 99 Madison Avenue.
Okay.
My website is nyestateplan.com, and you can call us at 718-544-5500.
And we expect to have you back here. Did you
Absolutely.
enjoy the first time on TV? What do you
Oh,
think?
absolutely. You are a great
As
interviewer.
long as you had a good time.
I did. Thank you so much.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. And remember, if there is a legal issue or a topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlash@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach your verdict. See you next time.